Okay, so there's more news here from Portland, Oregon, right? We know that there is now an en banc review of this 3-judge Ninth Circuit panel ruling that was just an absolutely terrible ruling in which 2 Trumper judges, right, split 2-1 decision, overruled Trump-appointed Judge Immergut's decision to block the deployment of federal troops in Portland. These 2 Trumper judges said, no, he can go ahead and do that. And it was such a terribly bad ruling that the 3rd judge and another judge and all kinds of legal scholars and the Attorney General of Oregon were all like, oh, no, we're asking the Ninth Circuit to do an en banc review, which is where normally that would be like the entire bench. It means the whole bench. But for the Ninth Circuit, there are so many judges that, it actually means only 11 judges who were drawn at random. And late yesterday, we heard that the Ninth Circuit did agree to do an en banc review. And so that's what's starting now. But when we look at these 2 Trumper judges from the 3-judge panel that said that Donald Trump had a right and that it was necessary for him to be able to utilize National Guard troops in our city, they were basing that decision on, we could talk about how much is on their own preference, their own extreme deference for the executive, but they also based it on sworn testimony, sworn filings from the Department of Justice. Donald Trump's Department of Justice, which is supposed to be providing accurate factual information, right? So historically, courts, and this is in my entirely lay phrasing here, right? I'm not an attorney. Historically, the courts have given the Department of Justice this sort of presumption of accuracy, of credibility. So if they bring numbers to the court is going to assume that that is accurate. This is where it gets interesting, and I don't think enough people are talking about this. I think because a lot of us are focused on this en banc hearing. But 2 days ago, October 27th, there was a story that broke in the Oregonian. It's by Maxine Bernstein, and it's entitled "Federal Lawyers Admit Errors in Officer Deployment Numbers to Portland ICE Building." So part of the justification, as I best understand it, from the Trump DOJ for needing to bring in the National Guard is that they were having to use a tremendous amount of resources, and ICE couldn't properly secure the tiny little ICE building, despite the fact that Portland's mayor, chief of police, city council, our congresswomen, our senators, the governor, and let's see who else, our attorney general, all said, nope, we don't need you here. This is entirely under control. Let local law enforcement handle it. They're handling it. We don't need to have the National Guard. In fact, in the initial litigation, Attorney General Dan Rayfield submitted evidence that there were at most 30 protesters at a time at the ICE facility before this escalation by the Trump regime, trying to create a riot, trying to manufacture a crisis that never existed. Local law enforcement can handle 30 kids protesting down at ICE. Donald Trump's claims that the city was on fire in Portland as a war zone are completely and utterly fabricated. It's complete and total horseshit. But this 2-judge panel based their decision that it was necessary for Trump to be able to use the National Guard. They based that on numbers, on data that the DOJ gave them. So according to this piece in the Oregonian by Maxine Bernstein on October 27th, the federal government had to come back and tell the court, we made 2 errors in the data that we put forward to the Ninth Circuit. The data that they based their ruling on, wasn't correct. In the initial court filings that the 3-judge panel saw, the federal government said that they had to reassign 115 federal protective officers from other areas to Portland. Yeah, it turns out that wasn't correct. The number was actually 86. And more than that, only a fraction of the 115 officers that the Department of Justice originally claimed had to be reassigned were ever in Portland at a given time. At most, 31 of them were in the city from July 15th to August 12th, not 115. So as all of this is coming out in court, the federal government had to own that, actually, these aren't the only errors. So they're now claiming that it's a mistake, but initially they told the court that it was undisputed that a quarter of the agency's entire federal protective service had to be redirected to Portland due to unrest here. Now they're like, whoops, our bad. That's not actually true. It's not 25%, it's 13%. In a filing Monday to the Ninth Circuit, the lawyer for the Department of Justice apologized for inaccurate information provided in sworn declarations and briefs. So I meant to cover this story yesterday, but I ran out of time before I had to head downtown to go listen to Timothy Snyder speak about his new book on freedom. But I'm kind of glad that I didn't get around to it then, because in the interim, Democracy Docket came out with their take on it. This is by Jacob Knutson. It says the Department of Justice corrected a key piece of evidence it repeatedly cited in the defense of Donald Trump's attempt to deploy the military in Portland, Oregon last month. In a letter to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, Andrew Burney, a DOJ attorney, said that the Trump administration had made several errors in describing how many special law enforcement officers it had sent to Portland in response to the protests. Democracy Docket says that this disclosure marks a rare walkback from the DOJ, and it may damage its legal defense of Trump's military intervention in the City of Roses. Yeah, because the judges made their decision based on data that the DOJ presented, and now it turns out it wasn't true. And this is what the Oregonian piece really didn't lay out very clearly, and I appreciated that Democracy Docket really hammered it home. The number of Federal Protective Service officials allegedly sent to Portland was a key piece that the Ninth Circuit panel relied on in determining last week that Trump had the authority to federalize and deploy guard troops in the city. So, of course, the DOJ lawyer is saying we deeply regret these errors, and he's trying to claim that the discrepancies shouldn't influence the panel's ruling upholding Trump's deployment. He's basically like, it doesn't matter if our numbers were all wrong, and they were all wrong in a way that benefited us and skewed the narrative in our favor. No, that shouldn't impact your decision making. However, according to Democracy Docket, in the ruling, the panel's majority, those two Trumper judges, repeatedly cited the amount of FPS officers in the city. At one point, saying that the president may in part rely on FPS deployments to measure whether he is unable to execute the law with regular forces and needs to mobilize the guard. Now, keep in mind, this ruling alarmed a number of legal experts, including the other judge on the panel, including other Ninth Circuit judges. Folks were flabbergasted at this ruling. It was deeply concerning. Judge Immergut, again, Trump-appointed judge, her initial ruling blocking the deployment was seen as incredibly well-reasoned and thorough. And these two Trump judges overturning it was deemed immediately as this is very poorly constructed. And now we find out that their argument, the foundation of that argument, was false information provided to them by the DOJ, which again, the DOJ is claiming they were errors and mistakes. So now we have this en banc hearing of 11 different judges, and they're getting corrected information. Now the question is, would the DOJ have offered up these corrections if Oregon's lawyers had not been asking some questions? How much of the information that Donald Trump's Department of Justice submits under oath is actually credible? How much are they actually telling the truth? Should justices in the United States continue to extend this presumption of credibility to the Department of Justice? This is a hugely impactful ruling, not just for Oregonians, but for the entire country. And to have it pivot on data that is false, that was submitted by Trump's lawyers. Do we not see here the implication? Do we not see here the grave concern? If they weren't truthful here, where else are they not being truthful? And what attorneys will be held responsible? Who in Donald Trump's Department of Justice, what lawyers for the DOJ are responsible for sending in sworn statements to the court that are not true? What's the consequence there? And also, will this corrected information make a difference in the ultimate ruling of the en banc group of 11 justices?